So imagine for a second that you spend your entire life just grinding, climbing the ladder to finally become the absolute indispensable person in the room.
Right, the person everyone has to go to.
Exactly. You put in the 80-hour weeks, you hoard all the specialized knowledge, you make sure that like every major decision has to flow directly through your inbox. You finally hit that pinnacle where your organization or maybe your family or your community project, it simply cannot function without you.
Which is the dream for a lot of people. I mean, that's what we're told success is.
Yeah, but today's source material argues that the very second you become completely indispensable, you've actually completely and utterly failed as a leader.
It's a brutal paradox to confront. I mean, we are fundamentally conditioned to view leadership as the accumulation of indispensability. We want the spotlight, we want the title, we want the followers, because that visibility is basically how modern culture measures success.
Right. Right. Which is kind of funny because if you talk to any structural engineer about how to build a, 100-story skyscraper, their eyes don't go up to the penthouse.
Oh, absolutely not.
They aren't looking at the gleaming glass exterior or the spire. They are completely obsessed with the unseen. The deep, massive concrete pilings driven like hundreds of feet into the bedrock, entirely buried in the dark.
Because without that hidden architecture, without that immense unseen weight-bearing structure the moment a storm hits or the wind shears, that beautiful glass tower just shatters. It collapses under its own weight. The visibility of the tower is entirely dependent on the depth of the foundation.
Yeah, and that brings us to you, the learner. Welcome to today's deep dive. We know you are out there and you are likely leading someone right now. Maybe you are guiding a team in a corporate boardroom or managing a household or organizing a grassroots community group or even steering a massive project in a digital space.
You're out there trying to build your own skyscraper.
Exactly. But what if the blueprint you've been handed by modern hustle culture is just completely upside down?
And that is exactly the premise of the document we are analyzing today. It's this incredibly comprehensive text titled The Call to Multiply, From Follower to Leader. And the author essentially deconstructs contemporary ego-driven leadership and replaces it with an ancient biblical paradigm.
And just to set the ground rules here for how we are approaching this, because I know that word biblical carries a lot of weight for people, our goal today is to objectively unpack the frameworks presented in this text. We are not here to endorse a specific religious viewpoint or preach a sermon or take any political sides at all.
Right, we're acting as analysts here.
Exactly. We are extracting the leadership architecture the author outlines and we're putting it under a microscope. We want to look at the profound psychological, sociological, and even like the neurobiological implications of what this text suggests. Because honestly, regardless of your background, the mechanics of human influence detailed here are just fascinating.
They really are. The author is mapping out fundamental human behavior, so we're going to explore why true influence doesn't actually start with a title, but in complete obscurity. We'll analyze the sociological difference between merely adding followers and geometrically multiplying leaders, and ultimately, the mission here is to extract a practical blueprint for leaving a legacy that outlives you.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's start with the central tension the author introduces right out of the gate. They call it the Great Reversal. The text argues that in this ancient framework, leadership is not a destination. It's not a title you earn so you can finally put your feet up. Fundamentally, the author posits that leadership is stewardship.
Yeah, and to understand the psychology here, we have to kind of delineate between a proprietary view of leadership and a fiduciary view. Because modern capitalism and digital culture, they heavily favor the proprietary view. The underlying message is that you own your influence. You own your followers, your startup, your brand.
It's very much my team, my vision, my empire. It's that classic founder mode mentality.
Yes. And the text argues for a fiduciary view. It posits that leaders are merely managing resources, people, and time that actually belong to a higher power or, in a secular translation, belong to the broader community or the future. In this model, authority is not a possession you fiercely guard. It is a temporary permission you are granted.
I mean, I have to play devil's advocate here.
Go for it.
If you don't feel a deep sense of ownership over your vision, how do you cast it with any conviction? Like, if a startup founder doesn't feel like they quote-unquote own their company, how do they find the grit to sleep under their desk and lead their team through a brutal economic downturn? We usually associate a lack of ownership with a lack of skin in the game.
That is the standard pushback, and it's a fair one. But let's look at the psychological toll of the proprietary model. When you psychologically own the enterprise, your ego becomes inextricably enmeshed with its success or failure. So if the company fails, you don't just experience a professional setback, your core identity is annihilated.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
The author suggests that stewardship, paradoxically, prevents leader burnout. Because when you operate as a fiduciary, you are radically committed to the care of the people and the mission, but the ultimate existential weight of the outcome doesn't crush your identity.
I see what you mean. It actually makes me think of the difference between a landlord and a world-class property manager.
Okay, I like that.
Right, because the property manager doesn't own the apartment complex. Their name isn't on the deed. But a truly elite property manager is fiercely protective of that building. They know the structural integrity inside and out. They care about the tenant's well-being. They are the ones fixing the boiler at 2 a.m.
Exactly.
They don't require their name on the deed to be radically invested in the flourishing of the property.
That analogy perfectly illustrates the historical case study the text provides regarding Moses. When Moses led the nation of Israel out of Egypt, he functioned as this ultimate property manager. He was a mediator, an administrator, a shepherd. But the text highlights this highly specific linguistic detail. The narrative repeatedly shows God referring to Israel as my people. Moses was constantly reminded he was not the owner.
He was managing the tenants, but he didn't hold the mortgage.
Exactly. And the moment a leader forgets that the moment leadership becomes possession, sociological decline follows. The author notes that when leaders believe they own the people, they start using the people to build their personal platforms. But when leadership remains stewardship, the leader uses their platform to build the people.
Man, that is a fundamental paradigm shift. So to you, the listener, auditing your own life right now, just think about the team you manage, or even your kids, or that creative project you are steering. Are you subconsciously treating them as raw material to construct your personal legacy and feed your ego? Or are you treating them as a sacred trust that you have been granted temporary permission to manage?
It changes the entire emotional frequency of how you lead. You manage diligently, but the desperation evaporates.
Yeah, that frantic grasping for control. So if we accept this premise that leadership isn't about grasping for a crown or owning an empire, it forces a really interesting question. Where does a leader actually get formed? If they aren't fighting for the spotlight, where do they go? The author uses a really striking phrase here. They say, God prioritizes who a leader is over what a leader does.
This introduces what the text calls the kingdom sequence. It is a theoretical progression for how enduring human influence is actually constructed. And the sequence moves linearly. It goes formation, which leads to faithfulness, which leads to fruitfulness, and finally, fruitfulness results in influence.
Wait, say that one more time so we have it. Formation, faithfulness, fruitfulness, influence.
Yes, and the pathology of modern leadership is the desperate attempt to skip the first three stages.
Oh, absolutely. We just want to jump straight to influence.
Right. We want the viral moment. We want the immediate platform. But the author warns that if you acquire influence without undergoing the rigorous, unseen process of formation, that influence will literally fracture your psyche. Visibility simply magnifies the existing structural integrity of your character. So if the foundation is fragile, handing someone public authority is just a recipe for catastrophic public collapse.
We see this constantly. Like, a young tech founder gets a billion-dollar valuation overnight, or a 20-year-old goes viral and suddenly has 10 million followers. And within 2 years, they completely self-destruct.
Right.
The platform didn't ruin them. The platform just applied immense pressure to a foundation that hadn't cured yet.
Which is why the text explores the geography of formation. Historically and psychologically, the preferred geography for building this foundation is the wilderness. Total obscurity.
Which is the absolute last place a highly ambitious person wants to be.
Naturally. We hate obscurity. But look at the historical blueprints the author unpacks here. Take the figure of David. Long before he was a king, he was a shepherd isolated in the pastures. The text emphasizes that David spent years protecting sheep from predators like lions and bears with zero audience.
Let's pause on that because from a psychological standpoint, that is fascinating. Fighting a bear in a pasture with no audience is entirely different from fighting Goliath in a stadium full of cheering soldiers.
It really is.
Because the pasture is low stakes in terms of social reputation, but high stakes in terms of actual survival and duty.
Yeah.
Is pure intrinsic motivation.
It is the ultimate stress inoculation. His unseen integrity and courage were stress-tested in total isolation, which neurologically prepared him to remain calm when the social pressure of a visible throne was eventually applied.
Wow. And the text also brings up Joseph, who represents a completely different kind of wilderness. He wasn't in a pasture. He was sold into slavery and thrown into a dungeon.
Yeah, Joseph's formation happened through severe constraint. The text notes he learned complex administrative excellence by managing fellow prisoners and incredibly scarce resources. When you remove all autonomy and resources, a person is forced to innovate and rely on pure character.
Right.
That obscure, highly constrained prison season was the exact laboratory that prepared his executive functioning to later manage the macroeconomy of Egypt during a catastrophic famine.
And then there's Moses, who arguably had the most intense unlearning process of them all. I mean, he was raised in the elite palaces of Egypt, steeped in imperial bureaucracy and absolute power. But the author points out he spent 40 years in the desert of Midian tending sheep. It was a complete dismantling of his ego.
It was identity stripping. The desert forced him to unlearn the coercive, top-down power dynamics of Egypt and replace them with the patience and dependence required to shepherd a flock. Those were the exact psychological traits necessary to lead a fractured group of refugees through that very same desert later on.
To make this concrete, let's look at how things grow in nature. The author uses an agricultural metaphor, but I think a lot of people misunderstand how seeds actually work.
How do you mean?
Well, we often hear this cliche that a seed has to be, quote-unquote, crushed by the dirt to grow. But biologically, that's false. A seed isn't crushed. It undergoes this quiet, invisible process of hydrotropism. It sits in total darkness, absorbing moisture, and its roots instinctively push downward, searching for water. If you plant an oak tree during a drought, those roots are forced to dive incredibly deep to find resources.
Right, they have to go down before they go up.
Exactly. That unseen, agonizing search for water in the dark is what creates the tensile strength in the trunk that allows the mature tree to withstand hurricane-force winds decades later.
That biological reality perfectly maps to the sociological argument here. The digital age conditions us to pull the seed out of the soil every 5 minutes, to post a picture of it on social media, demanding to know why it isn't a tree yet.
That is such a good point. We just won't let it stay in the dark.
The author is insisting that hiddenness is not a delay in your career trajectory. It is an intentional design. Obscurity is your apprenticeship.
So listener, think about your current reality right now. Maybe you are sitting in traffic, commuting to a job you feel totally overqualified for, or you're staring at a massive, mind-numbing spreadsheet, or doing the unseen emotional labor of caring for a sick relative. The culture tells you this is a detour, a waste of your potential. This text argues the exact opposite. This is the soil. This is where your root system is being forced deep to search for water.
The author suggests that public leadership merely reveals a person, but private obscurity is what actually constructs them.
Okay, so we've established the environment of obscurity, but let's look at the mechanics of what you are actually supposed to be doing while you are buried in the dirt. Because you aren't just sitting there doing nothing. The author references a specific ancient proverb from the Gospel of Luke. Whoever is faithful in very little is faithful in much.
This introduces the concept of micro-obedience. The author suggests that the universe, or, just the fundamental mechanics of human trust, treats ordinary menial duties as diagnostic tools.
I have a personal example of failing this diagnostic test miserably.
Oh, do share.
Yeah. Years ago, I was working at a mid-sized agency, trying desperately to get promoted to a director role. I was leaving the office late, completely absorbed in how I was going to pitch this massive campaign to the VP the next morning. I walked past a crumpled-up coffee cup in the hallway. I saw it, registered it, and just kept walking.
Because you were too busy with the big stuff.
Exactly. In my head, I was too important and too busy thinking about the big pitch to pick up trash. 10 seconds later, the CEO of the company walks out of his office, bends down, picks up the cup, and throws it away. I wanted to melt right into the floor.
Oh, man. Yeah, that is the perfect encapsulation of micro-obedience. You failed the stress test of the mundane. Character is fundamentally scalable. How you handle a minor unseen task like the trash in the hallway, or the tone of an email you send to a subordinate, or just keeping a minor promise to your child is the truest statistical predictor of how you will handle massive public authority.
Because you can't fake your reflex, right? When you practice micro-obedience, you are building psychological habit loops. If you consistently tell the truth when it costs you $5, your brain myelinates that neural pathway.
Hmm.
So when you are suddenly the CFO and you have the opportunity to embezzle $5 million, you don't have to agonize over a moral dilemma. Your reflexes are already wired for integrity.
And this has massive implications for our current sociological moment. We are living through an era of historically low societal trust capital. Deepfakes, curated aesthetics, ghost-written thought leadership. I mean, anyone can project immense authority with zero underlying substance.
Right. The public is deeply cynical because we have watched countless polished facades just collapse.
Precisely. The author implies that leaders who possess actual, integrated, hidden integrity, where their private habits are a flawless match for their public rhetoric, they're going to experience a compounding advantage over time. Because the public authority that stems from manufactured polish is fundamentally brittle.
I want to challenge you, the listener, right now. Run a diagnostic on your own life. What is the one tiny, mundane responsibility you are currently neglecting simply because doing it won't earn you any applause? Is it a tedious expense report? Is it having a difficult but necessary conversation with a friend?
It's usually the thing we brush off as beneath us.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The author is daring you to stop viewing that neglected task as an annoyance and start viewing it as the actual proving ground for your future capacity to lead.
It is a radical reframing. It elevates the mundane to the sacred.
Okay, let's follow the logical progression here. Let's assume our listener has embraced the obscurity of the wilderness. They are diligently practicing micro-obedience. They have built the unseen foundational pilings. How does this internal integrity translate into external impact? Because eventually, you do have to lead outwardly. The author introduces a massive shift in strategy here, moving from a model of addition to a model of multiplication. They call it kingdom mathematics.
Yeah, this is where the text transitions from internal character formation to external organizational design. The difference between addition and multiplication in leadership is basically the difference between a movement that dies with its charismatic founder and an ecosystem that transforms multiple generations.
Let's break down the pathology of the addition model first. This is basically the guru model, right?
Yes, exactly. Addition is linear and egocentric. You lead and you convince 10 people to follow you. You optimize your marketing, you work 80 hours a week, and 100 people follow you. But the entire structure relies on your personal charisma, your energy output, and your direct supervision.
And the fatal flaw is that the leader becomes the absolute bottleneck.
Right.
The capacity of the organization is hard capped by the leader's physical need to sleep. And more importantly, when the leader retires or burns out or dies, the entire structure disintegrates because the followers were attached to a personality, not a mission.
The author contrasts this with multiplication, which is geometrically different. A multiplying leader doesn't aim to gather the largest crowd. They aim to release the most capable leaders. They take a highly concentrated group of individuals and invest deeply in them, transferring not just technical knowledge, but character, resilience, and decision-making frameworks.
The text uses the historical example of Jesus of Nazareth here, which, from a purely sociological network theory perspective, is a masterclass in geometric scaling.
It really is.
He didn't build an institution, he didn't write a book, he didn't scale through mass media. He spent 3 years pouring an immense amount of time into a micro cohort of 12 ordinary guys.
Yeah. He prioritized depth over width. The public spectacles drew crowds, sure, but the private, highly intensive discipleship is what built the resilient network. Those disciples internalized the operating system and then multiplied it across the known world.
The author gives a very specific blueprint for this, citing a letter from the Apostle Paul to his protege, Timothy. The text is Timothy 2.2. Paul writes, "Take what you have heard from me, entrust it to reliable people who will then be qualified to teach others."
In that single sentence, you have a 4-generation architectural plan. Generation 1 is Paul, Generation 2 is Timothy, Generation 3 consists of the reliable people, and Generation 4 are the others.
Okay, I have to push back hard on this, though.
Sure, what's the issue?
This sounds incredibly idyllic, right? But let's place this in the reality of modern quarterly capitalism. You are a middle manager. Your VP wants a 20% increase in output by the end of Q3. Letting go of control, delegating critical tasks to a Generation 2 who is going to make mistakes, work slower, and potentially blow the quarterly target that is literal career suicide. The pressure to just do it yourself because it's faster is overwhelming. How does this ancient text reconcile with modern economic reality?
Well, the text doesn't reconcile with short-termism at all. It actively rejects it. The author is making an argument for profound long-termism. Yes, in the short term, doing it yourself is faster. Addition is always faster than multiplication initially. But if you never endure the friction of empowering someone else, you will remain trapped in the addition model forever.
You just end up carrying the load until you break.
Exactly. You will spend the rest of your life exhausted. The author posits an incredibly challenging metric here. They say a leader's greatest achievement isn't what they execute themselves, it is who eventually surpasses them.
Your greatest achievement is who surpasses you. Wow. That is a direct assault on the human ego. Because we all harbor this secret desire to be the indispensable hero who swoops in and saves the day.
We do. And the author is stating unequivocally that if your organization or family falls apart the moment you leave the room, you haven't actually built anything. You have merely performed. You've created dependents, not disciples.
Okay, assuming the listener is willing to swallow their ego and take the risk of multiplying, the next logical hurdle is selection. Because if you are going to hand over the keys to the car, you need to make absolutely sure you are choosing the right person to invest in. The author explicitly warns against choosing people based on what they call polish.
Polish is the great trap of modern corporate hiring and social networking. We are biologically wired to gravitate toward charisma, eloquence, a flawless resume, someone who is socially magnetic and speaks with supreme confidence in meetings.
The person who looks the part. The tall person with the great jawline who uses a lot of corporate buzzwords.
Right, exactly the kind of surface-level facade the author warns against. Polish can easily mask a deeply fragile ego, an inability to absorb criticism, or just a Machiavellian selfishness. The biblical model insists that leaders must look past polish and hunt for potential, and the author outlines 5 pillars of reliability to look for in a mentee.
Let's figure out what these pillars actually look like in the wild. If polish is a trap, how do we spot potential? I imagine the first thing ties right back to our conversation about micro-obedience, right? Doing the work when the spotlight is off.
Yes, the author identifies the first pillar as faithfulness. Can you trust this person to honor a mundane commitment when there is zero social reward for doing so? We go back to Joseph in the dungeon. If someone is unreliable with the small, boring administrative tasks of an organization, giving them access to your profound leadership insights is just a squandered investment.
That makes total sense. What about how they handle failure or feedback? Because I've seen incredibly talented people absolutely self-destruct because they couldn't handle a negative performance review.
That leads to the second pillar, which is teachability. From a neurobiological standpoint, you are looking for neuroplasticity and a lack of ego defense mechanisms. Do they receive correction with curiosity rather than defensiveness? The author makes a crucial equation here. They say moderate talent combined with relentless teachability will always exponentially outperform brilliant talent that is rigid and arrogant.
I use a sports analogy for this.
Yeah.
If you are the general manager of a basketball team, you don't use your first-round draft pick on the guy with the flashiest highlight reel who constantly argues with the coach and refuses to learn the playbook.
Right, that's a toxic asset.
Yeah. You draft the player who might be a little raw, but shows up 2 hours early to the gym, asks the veteran players for advice, and stays late to analyze film. You draft the growth mindset.
And that intrinsic drive connects to the third pillar, spiritual hunger, or intrinsic motivation. Does this person pursue growth proactively, or do you have to constantly micromanage and incentivize them? The author uses Daniel as an example. Exiled in Babylon, surrounded by a hostile culture, nobody was forcing him to study or maintain his disciplines. He did it because he was driven from the inside out.
So we have faithfulness, teachability, intrinsic hunger. What prevents this highly motivated, teachable person from just using your mentorship to climb over you and serve their own ego?
And that is where the fourth pillar is critical, a servant posture. You have to observe how they treat people who offer them absolutely no social status. Do they willingly serve in unnoticed areas? The author points to John the Baptist, who had massive public momentum, but willingly diverted his followers to Jesus, stating, "He must increase, but I must decrease." If a potential mentee is only interested in leadership for the perks, they are a parasite, not a partner.
Wow. And what's the final piece of the puzzle? Once they have all these internal traits, what makes them capable of actually continuing the chain?
The fifth pillar is reproducibility. Are they a conduit or are they a cul-de-sac? Do they naturally share the insights they are learning with their peers, or do they hoard knowledge to maintain a competitive advantage? You are looking for someone who instinctively wants to elevate the people around them.
A conduit, not a cul-de-sac. I love that. I want the listener to stop right now and visualize their current network. Think about your workplace, your community board, your digital spaces. Scan past the loudest person in the room. Scan past the person with the Ivy League degree and the polished slide decks. Can you identify just one person who exhibits these 5 quiet traits? Faithfulness, teachability, hunger, a servant posture, and reproducibility. Because the text argues that pouring your life into that one person will yield a massive generational return.
But identifying them is only the prerequisite. The true challenge is how you actually train them.
Which brings us to the mechanics of apprenticeship. You've found your Timothy. How do you transfer your knowledge? Because in the modern corporate world, onboarding just means sending an HR link, giving them a PDF manual, and throwing them to the wolves.
And the author aggressively critiques that approach by pointing back to the rabbinic discipleship model of the first century. This ancient model was not based on classroom lectures or explicit knowledge transfer. It was based entirely on intense proximity and shared life.
Why is shared life so critical, though? Can't I just teach them in a weekly 1-hour Zoom meeting?
Because of how the human brain actually acquires complex skills, cognitive scientists differentiate between explicit knowledge, facts and procedures you can write down, and tacit knowledge. Tacit knowledge is the nuance of leadership. It's how to read the emotional temperature of a room, how to regulate your nervous system during a crisis, how to deliver harsh feedback with deep empathy. You cannot transmit tacit knowledge through a PDF.
It requires mirror neurons. You have to see it happening.
Precisely. The mentee has to physically observe the mentor navigating ambiguity in real time. The author writes, information informs, but shared life transforms.
The text outlines a 5-step pathway for this kind of apprenticeship. I want to walk through how this actually plays out in a real-world scenario. Let's say I'm a senior project manager training a junior employee.
Okay, so step 1 is to model. I do, you watch. The mentor handles a difficult client negotiation, and the mentee simply sits in the room, observing not just the words spoken, but the body language, the pacing, and the ethical boundaries being maintained.
Okay, and then step 2 is assist. I do, you help. So I'm still leading the client meeting, but I asked the junior employee to present one specific slide. They are stepping into the arena, feeling the adrenaline of the pressure, but I am still carrying the structural weight of the meeting.
Step 3 is the critical pivot. Observe, you do, I watch. The roles flip. The mentee leads the client meeting. The mentor sits quietly in the back. This provides a psychological safety net, but forces the mentee to make the hard calls. Afterward, they debrief, which is where that teachability pillar is heavily tested.
Right, because if they get defensive during the debrief, you know you have a problem. Then step 4 is delegate. You do, I review. The junior employee now manages the entire client account independently. I am no longer in the room. But we maintain relational accountability. I'm available for high-level counsel if a crisis hits, but they carry the weight.
And finally, step 5, release. You do, and you take someone else with you. The mentee is now fully autonomous, but the cycle isn't complete until they begin step 1 with their own novice. Generation 2 begins modeling for Generation 3. The geometric multiplication is finally unlocked.
Again, I have to look at this through the lens of modern reality. If I actually walk someone through those 5 steps with the kind of deliberate shared life proximity the author demands, that takes years, decades maybe. In a culture obsessed with life hacks, speed reading, and scaling fast, this feels agonizingly slow.
The author anticipates that exact frustration and offers a profound theological and philosophical counter. They write, "Heaven is never hurried. True, deep human formation cannot be microwaved. We have been sold a lie by the Industrial Revolution that human development can be optimized like a factory assembly line. If you want a fast crop, you plant radishes and harvest them in a month. But if you want to grow an oak tree that will provide shade for your great-grandchildren, it takes 50 years.
Wow. It requires an absolute surrender of our modern timeline. It forces you to ask whether you are optimizing for a quick hit of dopamine and quarterly profits or for enduring generational impact.
It does. It requires immense patience and a complete suppression of the ego. But the compounding interest of this method is staggering. If you spend 3 years deeply forming 3 resilient leaders and they each do the same within a few decades, you have fundamentally altered the landscape of your industry or your community.
We have covered an immense amount of ground today, and I want to just distill this massive paradigm shift for the listener. We started by dismantling the ego of leadership, reframing it from the proprietary ownership of an empire to the humble stewardship of a property manager. We learned that the deepest foundation is forged in the hidden wilderness, where we practice the invisible scaffolding of of micro-obedience.
We analyzed the exhausting bottleneck of the addition model and contrasted it with geometric power of multiplication. We explored the necessity of looking past superficial polish to find the raw potential of teachability and faithfulness. And finally, we unpacked the neurobiology and sociology of the ancient apprenticeship model, that slow, beautiful process of shared life.
Which leads us to a final, incredibly poignant concept the author introduces regarding legacy. They call it dying empty.
Yeah, the text references historical giants like Hudson Taylor and John Wesley. These were individuals who operated with a completely different endgame. Their goal was not to arrive at the end of their lives clutching hoarded wealth, power, or specialized knowledge. Their ambition was to pour out every single drop of wisdom, experience, and capital into the next generation, to live completely sent, and to die entirely empty, ensuring that absolute no potential was taken to the grave.
Dying empty, leaving nothing on the table because you gave it all to the people coming after you. That is a heavy, beautiful challenge. So, to you listening, we want to leave you with a concrete action step today. The text suggests drafting what it calls a kingdom impact statement. From a secular standpoint, think of this as a personal legacy blueprint. Write down exactly who you are called to serve right now and specifically who you plan to multiply your knowledge into. We are challenging you to radically alter the primary question driving your career. Stop agonizing over the question, when will I finally be ready to lead? And start asking, who am I currently preparing to lead after me?
And as you ponder that, I want to offer one final thought regarding the sheer mathematics of multiplication. If you truly internalize this framework, if you suppress your ego, embrace the slow, unglamorous work of the wilderness, and pour your life into just one reliable, teachable person, the greatest, most earth-shattering leadership achievement of your entire existence might be accomplished by someone you will never even meet.
Let that sink in for a second.
It could be a breakthrough engineered by a leader who was mentored by the person you choose to start mentoring tomorrow. Because you chose the slow, unseen work of multiplication over the visible flash of addition, your legacy is quite literally walking around in someone else's future.
Your legacy, walking around in someone else's future. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Tomorrow, when you walk past a towering skyscraper, don't look up at the penthouse. Think about the deep, hidden, agonizingly slow foundational work that makes it all possible. Keep building in the dark.